Alright guys, so we've got this super simple fake gas fake gas Walmart brand Instagram clone that I built in Rails 4. And it can do basic stuff. You can upload a post and comment on post and like post, etc., etc. But we want to make it more social. So let me go ahead and create a user here, and we're going to call it hello. So basically, we want to be able to follow and unfollow users, right? So I'll upload a picture here, see if everything works. Everything seems fine. So I should be able to go to this user's profile and see a button that says follow and unfollow, or unfollow, just like you'd see on Twitter or Instagram, right? I guess this makes more sense if I'm signed in as a different user. So let's create another one. We'll call it goodbye. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so I'm logged in as goodbye. I can like stuff, etc., but I want to become friends with hello, or at least I want to follow what he's doing. So again, I should be able to see a button here like you would see typically on any other social network. Now we should probably start working on the data model, which is not really as intuitive as you'd think. You may think that you can do like a has many relationship where a user has many followers and is followed by many, but that really won't work. So we can do a Rails workaround where you'll do a has many through instead. So you do something like that. And this will save us a lot of trouble, because instead of having a following table and a followed table, which incidentally will be like crazy redundant, because we already have a users table which has all the users information. So whenever anything changes in the followed or the following table, it would have to sort of re-render everything else in the users table, and all of the rows would have to change, which is a huge pain in the butt and totally unnecessary. So what we can sort of do is create an abstraction and think of it in terms of resources, like when one user follows another user, what's happening? A friendship's being created, right? And when a user unfollows, the friendship is being destroyed. So essentially, one user can follow many or have many followers through these friendships. Also, it's worth mentioning that we're not doing the Facebook type of friendship where user A is friends with user 2, or user 1 is friends with user 2. Instead, we're doing user 1 follows user 2. Okay, so it's not it doesn't have to be a mutual friendship. It can just be I'm following this guy, he doesn't have to be following me. So I've been seeing the active and passive terminology used a lot, so we're going to go ahead and use that in the sense that an active follower is somebody who goes and clicks follows on somebody's profile, and a passive friendship is one in which someone is being followed, but he didn't actively go out and follow the other user. Hopefully that makes sense, and it's not too weird. Once we get to writing some code, it'll make a little more sense. Now, also remember, you can be a person that has a lot of followers. So essentially, user A dot followers would be an array of people who are following user A. But the other side, the followed, doesn't really work, and in the plurality doesn't work. You can't have followeds. At least it doesn't sound right. So instead, we're going to use following, which is the same way that Twitter does it, and we'll use source to match it to followed ID. So again, it's getting a little weird. Let's write some commands first, and then it'll make a little more sense. So what we're going to do is we're going to create the friendship table. And we'll create a model, and that'll create a migration as well. So we'll do Rails G model friendship, and it's going to have a couple different columns. It's going to have the follower ID, which is going to be an integer, and it's going to have the followed ID, which we're going to source to later, which is also going to be an integer. Now remember that Rails gives us a couple things for free. We're going to get ID column, and we're going to get what else will we get? We'll get timestamps as well. So let's go ahead and run this. This might give me a conflict. No, okay, we're good. So we've got a table now with a couple columns. So we're going to go ahead and check this out in Vim. So let's open a couple different tabs here. Let's run the server, and we'll do Vim. Let's check the database migration file. So create friendships. There we go. And we're right here, column, column, and timestamps. Awesome. So what we're going to do now is add a couple indexes so that we can find friendships by follower ID and followed ID. So let's add some indexes on the columns. We'll say add index friendships. We'll do follower ID first, and this is essentially the same but with followed. And then we're gonna do a compound index, which will take an array. I guess this, I'm not sure if it's called an array in Ruby, so whatever. It could be a hash. I forget. Whatever this data type is. Follower ID, followed ID, my bad. And we're also going to make it unique true. Now this isn't really necessary because this is wrong. I'm sorry. Hold on. It should be like that. Okay, now we don't really need the unique because in our UI you're going to have an actual button that says followed or unfollowed, and it'll change depending on the friendship. But just to be, just to be symmetrical, just so we can raise an error here, we're going to put unique true. Also, people could really, somebody could mess around with the friendships with curl, so we'll just keep unique true there. We're going to run the migration, and I think I got an error here. Before we do that, let's do friendships. Okay, so Rails DB. This might not work, because this is Rails 4. Yeah, okay, we got to do rake. In Rails 5, rake and Rails are used interchangeably, or rake was sort of like added to the Rails command. So we're going to run this migration. And our table was created with a couple columns and some indexes. Go ahead and, first of all, let's check to see, let's check to see if our model was created, first of all. So we'll go here, and when we ran the migration, when we generated a model, we got our friendship model right here. Whoops, what did I just do? Friendship model. And we also got a migration file, which we edited. Now we just ran the migration, so let's go and check the schema. And we should have our table created, so friendships, there we go. We got our friendships table with some indexes. Okay, so let's close this. We're going to go ahead and open the users model, and we're going to add some stuff to it. So I'm going to do has many active friendships. Even though the underlying model is called friendship, we're going to say has many active friendships, and we're also going to use class so it looks for the friendship model. Instead of something like has many posts, we'll do has many active friendships. And we're also going to have to add a foreign key to this. So let's reference the class name. We'll say active class name friendship. The next thing we'll do, is add the foreign key. And we'll say this is it followed? Follower ID. That should be right. And when the user is destroyed, we want to destroy the friendship, obviously. Let's format this a bit. Okay. Dependent destroy looks good. So just like we did for posts, the posts table has a user ID that identifies the user. And this is essentially connecting the two tables. And that's known as the foreign key. So we have to explicitly identify the foreign key in this case. Let's go ahead and add the other side of this to the friendship model. And we'll say belongs to follower class name. It's going to be user. And don't worry about, well, we don't need this one right now, followed, but we'll just add it just for the sake of not having to come back to this file. Let's also add some validations just to make sure that nothing is inserted without having everything you need. So we'll say validates follower ID presence true. We'll do the same for followed ID. Okay. So now we're going to use the has many through that we were talking about. So we can say that a user has many followers or is followed through friendships, right? And in this case, instead of using followed, we're going to use following, just like Twitter and Instagram do it. Because again, like we said before, followed, the plural, doesn't make a lot of sense. So let's go back to the friendship model. And we'll say has many, I will say following instead of followed, through active friendships. And we've got to source to the followed IDs, just so that Rails knows that the following array is set to followed IDs. So we'll say source. This is a parameter you probably don't use a lot, source, but definitely has its purpose. So source followed, let's see, has many following through active friendships, source followed. Okay, that looks right. Now we can actually use methods like include to see if the array of one user's followers includes this other user. So we'll go ahead and check that in the console later. But for now, let's write a couple methods so that a user can follow another one, so that a user can unfollow. And we're also going to create a third method to check if a user is following another one. So we'll say we're going to define the follow one. We'll do the follow one first, and this will take a parameter, and we'll say follow user. Or this isn't Java. I'm too used to JavaScript. Ruby is actually pretty cool, but going between the two languages is kind of tough. So def follow active friendships. Let me write this out because I got to think a bit. Active friendships dot. We're going to create the friendship. So we're going to say followed ID is the user dot ID. User being the guy that he's following. Okay, and let's do the same for unfollow. Say def unfollow active friendships. Instead of doing create, we're going to do find by. We're going to have to find the user, and we're going to destroy that relationship. So we're going to say followed ID is user ID, and then we're going to prepend destroy to it to destroy the friendship. Active friendships, find by, followed ID, user ID, destroy. That looks okay. Then we'll return a third method, or we'll create a third method that'll allow us to check if a user is following another one. So we'll say def following dot include user. Save that. So now essentially we have active friendships, which means a user is following another one. So now we got to do the other side of that, which is passive. So what we're going to do is we're going to add has many passive friendships. Has many passive friendships. And we're going to do the same thing. We'll say class name friendship. And we'll also add a foreign key, which will be, this is essentially just the opposite. Followed ID. And we'll just copy paste this. Okay. And we'll do the same thing we did. We'll just copy paste this instead, and we'll say has many followers through passive friendships. And the source is, so that's, nope, this is not good, is follower. Okay, looks good. You actually don't need the source here because followers in singular does work, and Rails will make it singular and it'll find that foreign key. But just for the sake of keeping it symmetrical, we'll say this, source follower, just so it's the same as up here. Okay, so what we can do now is go ahead and check in the console to see if our methods are working, if our friendship associations are working, etc., etc. So I'm going to open up a console here, and we'll say Rails console, and we'll create a couple users. So we'll say user1 equals, we have 2 users in our database, so we'll just use those, and user2 equals user2. Great. Now, if you recall, we've got the follow, we've got the follow, we get the unfollow, and we got the following question mark methods. So let's go ahead and make user1 follow user2. So we'll just say user1 dot follow, and it takes the other user as a parameter. So we'll say user2. User1 follow user2. Hopefully this doesn't raise an error, and it worked. Good. Now we can go ahead and check if user1 is in fact following user2. So this is going to return a Boolean. It's going to say true or false. So let's go ahead and try it out. We'll say user 2 dot well, let's do it this way. We'll say followers dot include, and it should include user1. So hopefully this says true and true. There you go. Nice. Awesome. So let's go ahead and try the unfollow now. So then we'll say user1 dot unfollow user2, and this should work. Great, it worked. Now we'll run the following method again, see if he's still following user2, if user1 is still following user2, and this should come out as false if all went well. Awesome. So everything seems to be working in the back end. Now the next step is to make this work for our users. So we got to create an interface for it. Now what I'm thinking is a button either here or up here that says follow when a friendship isn't established, and conversely it'll say unfollow when someone is following another user. So first thing, let's just go ahead and add a button to the views so we can see what it'll look like. So this is Haml, by the way. It's like a Ruby HTML syntax. It makes it a lot easier, but it works with indents. So make sure you have like a plugin like this that shows you your indent. So you're gonna get it's gonna throw a bunch of errors. So get an if statement, and we'll say if user signed in and not current user, we are gonna, let's just return a button. So we'll do something like, and this is where Haml gets a little weird. You do class hash rocket. We'll just say button since we're using Bootstrap, and we'll just say default. Or you know what? Yeah, let's use default for now. And then you can just close this up and say follow. So let's just see how this looks real quick. Refresh, and we got an error. It says if user signed in and current user. Okay, this method is not being used properly. That makes sense. So we'll do add current user. And this is a method defined in our application controller, by the way. It takes one parameter, so this should work now. Cool, so we got a nice follow button there. Well, not a nice follow button, but a button nonetheless. I'm not a designer, so it's pretty ugly, but whatever. Now we can add the other side of the situation, essentially. So let's add an if statement inside of this. Notice the indents, they have to be just right for Haml to work. So we'll say if current user following, which is a method we created, following this guy, then we don't want that. We want instead an unfollow. So we're going to copy paste that, and we'll say unfollow. And let's indent that, this as well, and we'll do an else if they are not following. So we'll say else button class button default follow. So let's make the follow actually blue. There we go. And should still say follow. Nothing should have changed. So let's check it out. Okay, there we go. Except for the color, of course. So cool. We got a nice follow button. Doesn't do anything, obviously, because we haven't set up any logic. So let's go ahead and do that. We'll create a controller. And we'll say, or instead of generating a controller, you know what I'm going to do? I'm just going to do it manually. So we'll go to controllers, new controller called friendships controller. And I'm lazy, so let's steal from our other controller, steal some syntax. Let's paste that in. Of course, this is called friendships controller. So we'll do friendships. And we'll end this. and this is going to have two actions in it. It's going to have the create and the destroy, which correspond to follow and unfollow, of course, and we want users to be logged in, so we'll also say before action authenticate user, which is a devise helper. Like that. Okay, that looks good. The next step before you forget is let's add some routes. So config routes, and we'll go to the bottom here and we'll say resource friendships. We only need a couple, so we'll say we got create and destroy. Cool. So what we can do now is run rake routes and check out our routes. So we'll say rake routes. And that was a bad idea because now I'm getting everything, but I can do a grep command. So we'll say grep friendships. And we'll see what we got. We've got our friendship routes with their corresponding HTTP requests, which is cool. So we can go ahead and mess around with our controller and the views as well. So let's go over to show Haml, and this is where Haml's going to get kind of weird. But I think this should work. So we're going to make that a Rails element, a Rails button 2, and we'll say this will be the unfollow. And we want to redirect to friendships path, and we'll pass it a couple things. We'll pass the user ID as the instance variable ID, and I think for Haml, for class, we can just put a comma here and delete this as well. Now that I remember, this is a destroy, so when we unfollow, we're gonna have to say delete. So I'm gonna go ahead and put that here. This should be fine. This class property here might give us an issue with Haml, but we'll fix it if that's the case. Let's do the same thing down here for the follow button. So we'll take that out. We'll make this into a Rails element, and we'll say button to follow, and we want it to go to friendships path. Same thing, I believe, should be fine. User ID, comma, and we'll get this parentheses out. Missing a comma here. Okay, so let's start up the server, and we'll mess around with these. We're gonna get an error in the console for sure if we run this, because the logic in these controller actions don't do anything yet. So let's create a private method first. We're going to call it find user, and we'll say def find user, and we'll create an instance variable called user, and we'll say user.find params by their ID. So it's going to be user ID. Okay, that should be okay. And let's end this. So that way we can just use that in both of these actions without having to explicitly state it. And here we'll say current user.follow, use those methods we created previously, and we'll just redirect to the user's page. Okay, let's do the same for the destroy, except it's going to be a delete, or it's going to use the unfollow. Okay, so let's go ahead and test this out. So let's restart the server just for good measure, and we'll check it out. And we'll hit follow, and we get an error. Undefined method. Okay, that makes sense. Let's go ahead and just keep it simple here, and let's redirect back to the profile page. So we'll do the same here. Okay. Now, if we do that, go to this page. All right. So let's refresh and follow, and boom, it works. We are now following this user. Let's go ahead and verify that this actually worked, and we'll check in our console. So it's not working. So we'll do Rails console, and user1 equals user first, user2 equals user.second. So what we did was, in this case, user2 is following user1. So let's verify that. So we can use our helper and we can say user2.following user1, moment of truth. Hopefully this returns the Boolean that we want and it says true. Awesome. So everything's wired up with the front end. It's working. Let's go ahead and try to destroy the friendship, and we'll say unfollow. Of course, this didn't work because my server's closed. So let's try it again. Okay. Okay, we're going to unfollow. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and check the console. And we'll say user1 equals first, and 2 is second. So now user2 should not be following user1. So we'll say user2.following. Hopefully this pumps out false. Awesome. So everything's working. One thing I should mention is that you'll notice here when I Christ. Let's keep closing my server. Okay. When I follow, I'm getting a page refresh. If you look up here, unfollow, follow. Now, you can make this not refresh or have an Ajax refresh so that whenever this is clicked, you don't get a full reload and it doesn't, if the user doesn't lose his place if he's all the way at the bottom. Kind of like this like button. So basically what's happening is that a request is being made in the background, and once the response is found, JavaScript will make the changes. So instead of this doing like a full-on refresh, JavaScript will do the work and the element will change, but the page stays the same. We're not going to do that right now. It's not super difficult. Maybe I'll do it in another video, but it's just basic. It's just Ajax and basic JavaScript. So we got a pretty cool Rails follow feature here. Not super complicated. Everything in Rails is pretty easy. You just had to think about the data model and how you were going to construct it a bit. So yeah, that's how you build a follow and unfollow feature in Rails. Go ahead and try it out on your own app, and good luck.